Today's video is all about insurance. I had an opportunity to sit down with a friend of mine when I was in Denver a couple weeks ago. We talked a lot about all the different types of insurance MSPs need to have in their business arsenal. This is not just cyber insurance. This is general liability, workers' comp, cyber liability, technology E&O, some other related employment insurance as well. There's a bunch of different things to be mindful of and to be careful about, and that's what today's conversation is about. It's a little bit longer than a typical video of mine because Jake and I sat down and we chatted for quite a bit longer than the actual video turned out to be anyway. So sit back and enjoy our conversation about insurance. So Jake, thanks for coming out. Thanks for driving out to the middle of nowhere here in Denver while I happen to be in town. It's really
Yeah,
great to have an interview in person, right? Having to have a conversation over Zoom is one thing, but having an in-person conversation is even better.
absolutely. No, I appreciate you having me. Thanks for making your way out to Colorado, and yeah,
Absolutely.
glad we could find the time to meet and make this work.
Yeah, so let's get into insurance, right? One of the things I run into all the time on the peer group side of the world is they MSPs don't know all the different types of insurance. And obviously cyber is a big thing, but there's
Right.
more than just cyber, right? So tell me a little bit about, like, if you're going to advise a smaller MSP, maybe a 1-2 person shop versus maybe a 10 or 15 person shop, like what are the policies they should be thinking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So 1 to 2 person shop, you're probably going to be working remote. Maybe even 10 to 15, you're probably going to be working remote. But let's say that we're like this. We're in person and we have an office space. So if I have an office space, just to start, I want general liability insurance. You hear what general liability is, everyone thinks it's just going to cover generally all liability, but
Right.
it's going to cover if somebody's going to come to my property and get hurt. That's how it's really going to protect. So Adam comes to my office. Let's say that you trip and fall, you slip on something and you hit your head, anything might happen, right? You're potentially going to sue me because you're going to say, well, Jake, I just got hurt at your office. I need you to cover me. You guys didn't salt outside. I know in Minnesota, you guys
Yep.
get icy parking lots. Same with here in
Yep.
Colorado. So somebody slips and falls, I need to have general liability insurance. And that's going to protect me as a business owner if somebody gets injured on site. But let's talk about if one of my employees gets injured, whether they're on site. I know in the MSP world, you're going off
Yep.
site a
Yep.
lot, right? I mean, how often are you driving to and from clients' places? I mean, potentially.
Could be all almost every day depending on the clients, right?
Right. I'm like, hey, my computer's messed up, or I need you to come fix something, or Wi-Fi's down, or whatever it may be. Let's say I'm driving from my house, from the business, whatever. As long as I'm doing it during business hours and I get hurt, workers' compensation coverage.
Okay.
That's going to protect me and the business from any sort of potential lawsuit that's going to happen from somebody getting hurt. So you hear about workers' compensation from construction worker. He
Mm-hmm.
hurts his hand, he cuts his finger off, whatever that may be, and now you're out an extended period of time. It's not just going to cover the damages that happen to you as the injury, but let's also talk about it from how long is Jake going to be out of the office, or how long is Adam going to be gone, right? I
Right.
mean, that costs some money. It's payroll, things like that. So workers' compensation is statutory as well, and it's a requirement. So I know here in Colorado, and I'm not exactly sure what the fines are in other states, but in Colorado, if you don't carry workers' compensation for your employees, it's a $500 fine a day.
Wow.
So you add that up to a year. I just talked about this with someone actually, roughly $182,000 per year.
Wow.
And it's not just a fine from anybody, it's the division of labor. And so they're going to come after you, the workers' compensation division, and they're going to fine you for not just the time that you didn't have it going forward, but for all the time in the past.
Oof. Wow.
So, I
Wow.
mean, right? Like, think about that. 1 year, 180, 2 years, 360. We keep adding and adding and adding. And I mean, that's a serious number.
Yeah, no kidding. Wow, I had no idea that was the thing that we had to worry about, right?
Right. And as a business owner, not many people know these things because insurance is this weird little world that people kind of stay away from or are scared of. And I get it. My homeowner's insurance is expensive, my car insurance is expensive, but you got to pay up in order to get the proper service. And I think that goes to the same with an MSP, right? The services that you're going to charge for are probably going to be a little bit higher than those around you because
Mm-hmm.
you know you're providing the best cybersecurity for your clients.
Right. So you mentioned during work hours. So what happens if I send a technician out in the middle of the night to go work on a server and something happens? Is there a different coverage for that, or is that kind of one of those weird edge cases?
No, that's a good catch. You're right. So I guess not technically during work hours, but let's say that I'm just at my house on the weekend and I get hurt. that's not going to
Sure,
cover it.
sure.
But as
Okay.
long as I'm doing it during a business service. So yeah, if
Okay.
it's late night, absolutely.
So one of the things that we don't talk about, right? We talk about all the cyber stuff. The cyber insurance is all the rage, but
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about some of the other things too, right? So talk to me about some of the like the employer insurance, the wrongful terminations, and those kinds of things, because I feel like there's some other things that may happen or may even be more likely to happen. So talk to me a little bit about some of those other options.
Yeah, so you hit it on the head. It's called employment practices liability, or what insurance agents like to call it is EPL. So employment practice liability is going to protect, we can go back to first party. First party is anything that happens between the business. So
Okay.
Adam and I work together, we're at the same firm, and we're both coworkers. Neither of us are the owner, but we're coworkers. And let's say that I just treat you terribly. I'm your manager. I just have a grudge out for you, right? I don't treat you well. I'm always rude to you in the workplace, maybe harassing you in some certain ways, talking about how you're not doing a good job, even though you do work hard. That's going to make it a pretty tough work environment.
Mm-hmm.
So having employment practices liability is going to protect the business owner if any of these types of issues are going to happen, because as the owner, if you're letting these things happen, you're negligent.
Right.
You're negligent upon these things. Not only is it first party, but third party, which can happen to, let's say Adam goes out to the construction company or to the manufacturing firm, and you're harassing the front desk person, or maybe you're treating someone rude, or you don't give them the level of service you want because of their age or their race or their ethnicity or whatever reason it may be. And so lawsuits like this, there's a lot of attorneys now that are contacting employees and saying, hey, have you been treated unfairly, or certain situations where maybe you were terminated and you didn't feel that it was correct, wrongful termination, wage and hour violations? I think that's number one within the MSP space, because you're working, like you talked about earlier, almost around the clock sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So am I getting paid overtime, or was it built into my salary? Adam got a bonus that Jake didn't. Well, I'm going to be pretty upset about that when you and I are working on projects
Yep.
together, right? So all of these different types of things layer onto one another. And then from a business owner, you hear this word directors and officers insurance. It's very widely known for public corporations because as a shareholder, if my director and officer of the company is not treating my shares correctly, I'm going to litigate against you.
Sure.
You made a promise that we were going to be here in 5 years and we're nowhere near that goal. My investments are shot because of that. That makes sense. But for private companies, a lot more people are starting to adapt this model of, okay, what is directors and officers insurance? So to not go too much into it, as a small to mid-sized business owner, not only can somebody come after the business due to your negligence, but they can potentially come after your personal assets. Having two lines of defense is better than one, which is better than none.
Sure.
So all of these things kind of layer onto one another. And again, it's these intangible assets. That's what I'm talking about all the time. I can see how many trucks you have. I can see how many workers are out in the field getting hurt, but can you see what goes on behind closed doors? And I'm sure if you read through a lot of your employees' Microsoft Teams or Slack or Zoom messages, they're probably not the most appropriate for the workplace. And we just don't realize that because we just get so caught up in normal life and we're all buddies, right?
Right. Right.
Until we're not.
Right. Yeah. Until it's too late, till the cat's already out of the bag, and
That's
all of a
exact
sudden,
right.
yeah. And I was talking to somebody earlier today. I'm like, the worst time to figure out that you don't have the right insurance coverage is when you have a claim, right?
Right.
You make a claim,
Right.
and all of a sudden the insurance company is like, sorry, dude, not helping you because you didn't do this, this, and this, or
Right.
or your coverage wasn't enough, or it wasn't the appropriate coverage, or like whatever. And I always make the joke in my classes because I talk about legal stuff. And I'm like, look, insurance companies have more lawyers than you could ever want to afford.
Right.
If there's a
Right.
loophole, they're going to find it. And no offense to you as an insurance
No.
agent, but like that's just the nature of the beast. So it's important to have a good relationship with your insurance agent, and especially for all of this business stuff. So if you think about the employer insurance from the wrongful termination, those kind of things, is that a thing that you should have when you have like one or two employees, or is that like a thing you maybe when you're 5, 6, 10, 15 employees? Like, is there an appropriateness as to when that's a good coverage to have?
There definitely is, but I see it a lot, even more now. I'm helping companies that have 2, 3 employees because maybe there was an issue in the past.
Sure.
And just because you didn't have the coverage in place, not to get too much into the weeds of the insurance world, but as long as there was no prior or pending litigation, and Adam treated Jake poorly 5, 10 years ago, now Adam sold the company, so he's sitting on millions, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going after him. You can have, if you had coverage in place and you potentially buy a policy for after the fact, somebody's usually going to come after you at that point, and so there can be coverage in that incident. So
Sure.
it's a little confusing, but again, that's why just have the conversation with your insurance agent. And so from the employment side too, outsourced HR is
Hmm.
something that I'm finding, because as a 5, 10, 15, 20 person firm, you don't really have the funds to just pay for someone to do your HR.
Right.
But finding someone you can outsource that to that can help with employee handbooks, because what happens if somebody gets sick or there's paternity leave or maternity leave, any of these things, do you have a procedure in place?
Right.
Because if not, one side or the other is going to be upset with how that situation unfolds.
Right.
So,
Especially if it's unfair. If you treat Jake differently than Adam, then that could potentially become a problem, right?
right, why does Jake get to work from home for a year after he had a kid and Adam had to be in 6 weeks later?
Right.
Well, there was no process in place. So that's the business owner being negligent. But you're right, and you can't wear every single hat in the world. Lakeside's a small firm, we're 15 people, but we rely on our outsourced partners to help with these things. It's tough to be a small business owner, and it doesn't get easier every day. I think it's only going to get more difficult, but relying on partners to make you better is something that I'm so passionate about. Technology, errors and omission, and cyber insurance. Those are probably the hottest topics I hear. And I'm sure you're discussing it all the time too,
Hmm.
not just from the MSP perspective, but how often are you filling out your clients' applications for them? Hey, I
Right.
need you to fill out my cyber application. We just got a big contract. They're
Yep.
requiring 3 million in limits, 5 million in limits. I mean, what do you see on your side from an MSP perspective?
Yeah, so it happens all the time where a peer group member will come and they'll say, "Hey, I'm being asked to do this. What do you guys think?" I'm like, "Well, I would talk to insurance agents." But usually, what I'd say, I'm like
Right.
because it's a great question. It's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is because what is the risk to the MSP for filling some of those things out, and presuming they're filling it out sort of on their behalf, and the client signs that this is what it is, but like it feels like there might be a gray area there for kind of who's at fault. Like we're not going to cover that. Is that the MSP's fault, or is that the insured party's
Right.
fault, or what's? So talk to me about that a little bit.
So there's definitely a bit of a gray line there, because as the MSP, I'm paying you to help with my cybersecurity.
Right.
Most business owners don't know what EDR is. They barely know what MFA is. So you're filling out the application for your client as the MSP. I don't think it's wrong to do that by any means. You're right, they need to sign it, but everything you attest for on that application is a part of the policy. And that's what it's used as an underwriter to go through who you are as a business,
Sure.
right? I mean, other than that application, what do I really know about you other than some of these new cyber insurance companies? They are running like external scans of your network, but what are they really grabbing? What
Sure.
I like is when they go onto a dark web and they try to see, okay, how many emails have been compromised or potentially fictitious that are out there? It's like,
Sure.
look, Jake, we see an extra A in your name or an extra E or Lakeside without a dash instead of Lakeside Dash Insurance. It's just Lakeside Insurance.
Right.
So there's different ways that they can go about looking at your risk, but that application is a part of the policy and I make that fact. So from an MSP, I wouldn't be scared to complete that application because that's something you're helping with. But you're right, is making sure what you're attesting is correct, having the client sign off on the application, knowing that everything is correct, and then using that for the policy. So
Sure.
I think those are very important things for people to understand. And like you said, though, go ask your agent. Well, what if your agent doesn't know anything about technology or cyber insurance because it's new? I consider it new as of in the last 15 to 20 years. I know that in our world today, new is usually, I just saw an Instagram video 30 seconds
Right.
ago,
Right.
and now I'm on to my next Twitter feed or something like that.
Yep.
But it's so cyber insurance, to get into kind of the history of it, it stemmed from crime coverage. So fraudulent transfers of funds, invoice manipulations. I mean, you think about like bank fraud and software and things like that, and then it's totally evolutionized because we don't really have to use banks like we used to in that aspect, where now everyone can do QuickBooks themselves. They can do their own accounting, but did you get a manipulated invoice maybe? And I'm sure that you talk about that in peer groups all the
Hmm.
time. Hey, and I saw it during COVID like crazy. Hey, we're going all online. We updated our bank accounts. Can you send over that payment? You send 50, you send 100, you send 200,000,
Yep.
and then you get that call 60 days later. It's like, hey, Adam, I haven't gotten your payment for the last 60 days. And you're like, that's when your heart drops,
Yep.
right? To kind of wrap it up, is that's the last line of defense. Do you have the cyber insurance? But also, what were you doing? If Adam's telling me that he has a new bank account, I better pick up the phone and confirm that that's him, because
Right.
anyone can use email to trick you, especially with AI. And we could go down a whole nother conversation and probably be here till tomorrow to talk about AI, but someone that doesn't speak English anymore but is really good with computers, they can use AI to formulate emails that
Right.
sounds like that. And they can, again, you know as well as I, make it sound like I'm an engineer, make it sound like I'm an architect or a construction person. And it'll use a little bit of a different lingo so that you do trust that person.
Right.
So, I mean, it goes pretty in depth, but I would say filling out an application is not a problem, but making sure that your client understands what everything is on there and that they're attesting for it at the end of the day.
Yeah, so then if I think about cyber insurance from an MSP perspective, talk to me a little bit about I hear terms like first party versus third party, and like as an MSP, because you have access to the keys to the kingdom,
Right.
how does that differ from a typical cyber insurance policy? Because I think correct me if I'm wrong, but as a regular small business, that your cyber liability is one thing, but as an MSP, your cyber liability seems like it's entirely different kettle of fish. So talk to
Totally.
me about that for a minute.
So it is a completely different fish, completely different animal. And a lot of that too, and what I utilize when underwriting with my markets is, what do your contracts look like? Do you guarantee certain things? What do patching updates look like? Are you guaranteeing that patches will be done by the third party, the
Sure.
first party, like you said? But that technology errors and omission are the key word. Or is there any error or omission that you did when providing a service? And as an MSP, I mean, your services could be this narrow or they could be this wide, right? I
Right.
mean, it's so differentiated. So you're right, the first party is what's happening in-house, and third party is what's happening externally. So what did I do to my client when I was updating certain things? Or you're right, you have the keys to the kingdom, and that's the perfect terminology, because let's say you're on vacation and you've got the keys to 100 businesses, somehow something gets hacked,
Mm-hmm.
you're out enjoying a nice cocktail in Hawaii and relaxing on the beach, but now everything's breaking loose. So
Right.
we need to have an insurance policy as a last line of defense, and no longer is it okay to just carry a regular $1 million limit of insurance. It's maybe, what do your revenues look like? What are your assets? How large are your biggest contracts? So having that open and honest conversation is something that I like to do, because I just need to understand, who are you working with? Do you work
Right.
with a lot of small firms? That's still important, but maybe you have 2 clients that take up 70% of your revenue, and
Oof,
that's
yeah.
always risky.
Yeah, it's risky for a number of reasons, right?
From, yeah, which we can get into, but from the tech side of it, it's, well, what happens if I breach their information? And then you're digging into, okay, what are the different regulatory bodies and different laws that happen? So
Right.
again, I go back to Colorado because this is my home state. 2 years ago, well, I guess 3 years ago, it's 24. In 2021, they put in a law that said if you're storing 500 Coloradans PII, or personally identifiable information, and it's breached, you have to you have to notify the Attorney General.
Oh, wow.
I don't expect anyone to know that,
Right.
but that's why you need to rely on professionals in the space, and also insurance partners that can come in with a forensic team. And I know that MSPs are extremely smart and they're very technology driven, but if a breach happens, you need to have somebody else to rely on. And let's get some second or third sets of eyes on there and bringing that in. And so that's something I pride myself on, is knowing the laws. But like what we say in our office is, it's not impossible to be in compliance, but it's improbable, because everyone changes laws all the time. I'm working here in Colorado, but I have clients in California, Virginia, Florida, Massachusetts, and I do learn about them, but relying on my partners that
Right.
know even more is something that's so crucial and so important. So long answer to a short question, but we partner together so well, insurance and MSP now.
Well, yeah, especially with just all of how everything just changes, and everything is becoming just one big thing where where as an MSP you have to worry about the security, and in order to worry about the security, the insurance is a key part of it. Like you
Right.
mentioned, it's kind of that last line of defense, right? The last thing you want to do is call our insurance agents and say, hey, I have a breach, or I have a data loss, or
Right.
whatever else. But you want that to be there should that be a thing that happens. So talk to me a little bit about like when something happens, like with anything, whether it's an injury, whether there's a breach, whether there's data loss. Like what is the kind of the common first steps for a business, whether it's an MSP or a non-MSP? What should they be doing first?
Yeah, so a really great question, because all of those things, though they may seem so off, a car accident, somebody getting hurt at work, data loss, everything can be resolved by having an incident response plan.
Okay.
So if you have a
Yep.
plan in place for any of those 3 things, like if you get a flat tire on the side of the road, do you know what to do? Or if somebody gets hurt at work and something in their eye, do we know where to go? Or the most layman's term that I always put it in is, if you have a fire in your office, everyone should know where to go, right?
Right. Yep.
If you have a fire in your computer, does everyone know where to go?
Right.
And that's when the wheels start spinning, because they're like, no, I mean, I'm going to contact you, or I'm going to contact my MSP, and you should hopefully be doing all of that. But if we have a written security plan or cyber incident response plan, that's going to help you. And I know
Right.
that the accounting industry and a lot of different like financial industries within FINRA are kind of going after that WISP, the Written Information Security Program.
Mm-hmm.
And so as an MSP, it's not that you shouldn't be doing it, but you should try to work with people that can help create those plans for you.
Right.
Because you're right, that's also a bit of a liability on your shoulders. So I like looking at it from the risk perspective. And that's why I like working with MSPs so well, because as I go through an application with a client and you answered no to 7 of the questions, it's not that I can't get you a quote, because it's risk at the end of the day,
Right.
right? There's your pool of insurance companies that might want to write you, maybe way smaller, but then I can turn to the MSP and say, hey, what's it going to cost your client to implement these things, to make them safer, to generate a bit more revenue for the MSP, and also make the MSP happier,
Right.
because it's like, oh my God, Jake, I've been trying to get them to do this for 5 years.
Yeah. Right.
All you have to do is throw an application in front of them and tell them that their insurance premium is going to go down and they'll get better coverage. And I'm like, it's a symbiotic relationship now, where before, I feel like 10 years ago, MSPs and insurance agents were almost like enemies
Right.
in
Right.
some of a way, but now we bring it all back together. So I think those incident response plans are key. Being proactive and not reactive. Like, don't wait until the problem happens. And you see it in life, whether someone gets into a car accident or somebody has a problem with their family. Like, once you hear about something that happens, then you make a change. But it's
Right.
like, let's not allow that to be the reason why I end up changing.
Yeah, I like that, proactive versus reactive, and think about a number of different kind of common scenarios. I'd like to spend a few minutes talking through some scenarios of situations that might come up, and what I'm looking for is what the insurance policy or coverage that would be relevant to that situation, right? And I think there's a number of things that could happen, right? So if we start at the most basic, right, one of your staff is on site at a client's office, right, and they get injured due to something dumb happening, nothing negligent, nothing malicious, just they trip and they fall, or they drop a server on their foot and they break their foot or something like that, right? Like, what coverage is the appropriate coverage there?
Yeah, so I think let's start with the easier one. So if I drop a server on my own foot and I'm at a client's site, I did that with my own property damage and injury. So that's where the workers'
Okay.
compensation is going to come in. But let's say that I tripped over somebody's chair. Well, now that's their general liability policy is going to need to come in. But
Sure.
to get things started, it's going to be my workers' compensation, and then my workers' compensation company is going to figure out what happened, and then they'll subrogate against that other policy.
Sure.
So again, that goes back to this whole conversation of, don't just make sure that you have the right coverages, make sure that the people that you work with have the right coverages. So whether that's requesting certificates of insurance to see what coverage they have in place, or if it's, again, a client of yours, just have the open conversation. But certificates of insurance are basically just a snapshot of what your coverage is. It's just a
Okay.
quick little summary that shows, hey, Adam, here's all the coverages that I have in place right now. Whether they show everything or just the surface level, at least you know. And I'd recommend that for anyone if you have a contractor coming to your house or something like that.
Right.
Request, hey, what kind of insurance do you have in place? Because the last thing you want to do, like we talked about, is waiting until after the fact.
And I think it makes a lot of sense from the MSP perspective, is to understand what your client's insurances are, because you should care about their cyber insurance and some of those other things. And it's good to have
Right.
that open conversation. All right. So what happens if I'm at a client's office and I trip, knock over like a vase, and it breaks their property? What is that? Is that my general liability?
That's exactly correct. Yeah, you're on the right page now. So yeah, general liability is going to cover property damage to
Okay.
someone else as well. So any sort of damage to their premises, maybe that happened, and usually, again, if it's something small, let's pay it out of pocket. If it's 5, 10, 15,000, it's like, all right, what's our delectable look like? And
Right.
let's
Right.
figure out what we need to pay out.
So the next little scenario is what happens if someone gets hurt at you, like, let's say I'm the MSP business owner, and one of my employees gets hurt at my office. That sounds like that's a workers' comp issue.
Yep. So
Okay.
yeah, we're kind of on that same page of, workplace related injuries are most likely going to be workers' compensation.
So then let's shift over onto the technical side of the world a little bit. So let's say that you're in charge of backing up data for a client, and you just missed backing up a device or a drive or something like that, and there's a data loss.
Right.
What's the insurance coverage that would be relevant there?
So we're going to go to your client's cyber insurance policy
Okay.
first because there's data loss on that. So the cyber insurance company is then going to look and say, well, Adam, you wrote that you do this daily, and it has been a month since you backed it up. Now that cyber insurance company is potentially going to litigate against your technology errors and omission
Okay.
because you had an error and omission for the service that you provided. So it's kind of a domino effect, right?
Okay.
We have to start one place to figure out how did this happen. You misrepresented on the application, and you may do daily backups all the time, but you're right. We got busy, Jake. Something happened. We messed up. Well, yeah, you messed up, but now you have that last line of defense to protect you and to protect your client because you can't recover data that's been lost
Right.
for 30 days if you weren't backing it up, and now we have a breach. So you're right. It's going to get a little hairy, and you're going to have to figure out, okay, whose policy is it going to come against? Most likely the MSPs. That's why making sure that you have that strong policy in place is so crucial.
I was a little surprised when you said the cyber insurance policy, but ultimately, yeah, I guess that makes sense, and eventually it does come back to the
It'll
MSP
end up right.
Yeah, eventually comes back to errors and omissions. But my first call would have been I would probably call you if you're my agent. I'm calling you. I'm gonna say, hey Jake, this is what happened, and you're gonna say, well, first we need to go call them, and then they're gonna come back and yell. It's
Right.
a little bit like a car
It
accident, right?
is.
It's one insurance company goes after the other one, and then they duke it out and figure it out, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And they're going to end up figuring it out with a forensic team to say, okay, yeah, you misrepresented on that application. And your client's probably going to be pretty upset,
Yeah.
as they should.
Right.
But yeah, their cyber insurance policy is not going to respond. So now it's going to come back to us.
So what about if a client has a security incident, right? And it happens. It's nothing really to do with you, or it's just a single client that has an issue. Like what's that the client's cyber security?
Yeah, so that's where the client cyber insurance policy is going to be so important. And that's why bringing in your trusted insurance agent to talk with your clients is so important. Like I have MSPs that I work with that are doing quarterly reviews, having your regular meeting, but then also, hey, are you comfortable with your cyber insurance limits? They're not pushing cyber insurance on them, but they're potentially getting a sign off sometimes too because they want that last line of defense and they want to make sure that they have coverage. And if you're $1 million corporation, 5 million, 10 million, you need to have that conversation with your agent to say, how risk adverse are you?
Right.
What's going to make you comfortable? Because just because you do 100 million in revenues, your data may be worth 200 million. I have no idea.
Right.
Until we have that open and honest conversation. And again, do it before the incident happens. Let's figure it out rather than waiting until there's a problem.
All of this insurance stuff is you need to be upfront on it. You need to be ahead of the game, not behind on the game.
Well, right. And I mean, again, to put it in layman's terms, like if your 16-year-old daughter or son just gets their license and you don't tell your agent and they go out and get into a car crash, well, your policy is completely different than what we thought. I thought it was a 45-year-old male that was driving the car, or a 45-year-old woman that's been driving that hasn't had any incidents, and now your 16-year-old that's been on the road for 5 days totals your car. It's like, are we going to have coverage? What's this going to look like? I don't know, right? So be open and honest. And I think putting it into the simple terms allows you to get more and more technical throughout time.
Very good. So the next one is, so I'm the MSP, right? And my MSP has a security incident that affects only my company. I'm the one that has the issue.
Okay.
Is that my MSP cyber insurance?
Yes, that is your policy. And that's why it's so important to have, it's a combo form. It's called technology errors and omission and cyber insurance. Yes, at the end of the day, it's my insurance as the MSP that's going to be protecting me.
Okay. So then the last one, this is the one that keeps everybody up at night. It's, so I'm the MSP and something gets into my network and it spreads and populates across all of my clients or multiples of my clients. Right. What insurance is that it gets involved there?
Yeah, so that's going to be my technology errors and omission and cyber insurance, because we need to figure out first, let's get a forensic team to determine how did this breach get in? How many people did it affect? And what do we need to do? Because notification costs can be so expensive, and that's a part of a policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to have to email, I'm going to have to call, I'm potentially going to have to post on my website. You're also dealing with reputational damages now, right? I mean, my reputation could go down the drain. I think it's important to say, okay, own up to the mistake, be open and honest, and then figuring out how you're not going to make it happen again, or creating a plan to mitigate against it, which I think is so important. So it's not if you're going to be hacked, it's when you're going to be hacked. impact.
Right. And
So
then mitigating the risk as best as you possibly can.
as best as you can.
Every turn, right?
Right. I mean, again, you go back to the car insurance example. I don't buy car insurance because I'm going to drive out on the street and go run into a bunch of people. I'm worried about that one person that might fall asleep at the wheel, or it's been drinking and driving or texting that hits me or a family member of mine, and you want to be protected when that incident happens.
Right,
So,
right. We're getting down to it. I want to ask you one more kind of larger question, because I've heard a number of my MSP friends talk about that they're having a hard time getting insurance in certain instances, because the insurance company's like, yeah, you're an MSP, you have a lot of risk. We don't really love that. So can you speak to that at all?
yeah, so I've definitely heard that topic as well recently, and I've been able to help a lot of MSPs recently place their policies, whether it's a million, 2 million, 3, 5, X amount of limits, depending on how big your firm is and how risk adverse you are. So we start with reviewing your contracts. What statement of works do you have? What master service agreements do you use? Because in that can really tell a lot about how much you want to protect yourself from potential risk. Because you rely on a lot of third parties now as an MSP. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
how many conversations are you having where it's like, yeah, I use that third party because they're going to back up my client's data 24/7.
Right.
Well, what happens if that falls or fails or something? But let's make sure that something's written in that SOW or that MSA saying, okay, you're protected. Then I go through a pretty strenuous 7 page application, but it's all about who are your clients, because I need to understand, are you working with people that are working with government parties, Department of Defense, municipalities? Maybe you work with schools, so you're dealing with a lot of children data. You're working with hospital systems, so you're dealing with a lot of PHI and personal health information. Or maybe I work with accounting firms, so there's just a whole slew of PII there because
Mm-hmm.
I've got people's social security numbers, their FEINs. I mean, everything that makes you, right? So we go through this process, we have the open dialogue, and we are just discussing what types of limits do you want to carry. But before I ask that question, it's figuring out the pain points, and then I can kind of point them in that right direction. I'm never going to tell you exactly what you need or what you don't need. I'm just going to at least educate you
Sure.
and allow you to make that decision. And I think that anyone that's buying anything, whether it's insurance, a car, a house, we want options. We just want to be educated, and that's part of the human experience, is being able to feel like, yeah, I made that decision, and you feel good about it afterwards.
Yep.
So going through that process with someone rather than just throwing an application at them, getting them a quote, moving forward, and I'll see you in 9 months for the renewal. It's like, what can we do throughout the policy term to actually help you, whether it's doing different cybersecurity trainings for you and for your clients.
Sure.
It's figuring out different risk management approaches to actually help a business owner. So let's be open and honest. And I think that's what everyone can hear from this whole conversation, is just, let's be proactive. Let's not be reactive. Let's figure out what those pain points are and what keeps you up at night.
Very good. So as we wrap this up, I do want you to give a plug for your business. So why don't you tell me a little about your business, how we can get a hold of you?
Yeah, so Jake Charen, I work with Lakeside Insurance. I have a designation, it's called RPLU, so that's Registered Professional Liability Underwriter. Not a lot of people in the insurance world in my side of the house really take those tests. So I've taken 14 different exams to learn about this whole world, because it's so different and confusing than anything else. Because again, I have to be able to have that high level of conversation as an attorney, but I just haven't taken the bar. I'm not going to take the bar, and I'm not going to go take those school years, but that's why I rely on partners like that. So we're an outsourced risk management company. We call ourselves risk architects because we design and create plans and insurance programs to help mitigate against issues from happening for your business.
Sure.
So like what we talked about, whether it's a workplace related injury, or you have a lot of cars on the road and you want vehicle telematics, or
Sure.
these cyber incident response plans. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Jake Charen. Feel free to add me. Its last name is Charen. We write in 43 different states. We're happy to help any client that we can, whether it's just a conversation to just open your eyes to what this world may be, or you have a good relationship already. I'm always open to having conversations and at least pointing you in the right direction to someone that can help you. So whether it's helping your MSP firm or one of your clients with a cyber insurance policy, we're happy to look at anything and really just give you that thumbs up, thumbs down, or let you know what things are in place. So again, I really appreciate you having me today. It was great to meet in person. I know we've
Absolutely.
talked a bit over the last few months, and it's
Yep.
just, yeah, it's nice to talk with people in person after you meet them over Zoom calls and things like that, to just kind of get along, because we're definitely on that same trajectory. And we agree, let's educate people, and let's just at least allow them to be enlightened. And whether they take it or they don't, that's It's,
Yep.
it's their choice at the end of the day.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.